Hello, and welcome to the Trustwave webinar, Decrypting the Future, Trustwave's 2024 Cybersecurity Predictions. My name is Doug Olenek, Digital Content Marketing Manager at Trustwave, and your moderator today. Joining us are Bill Rucker, President of Trustwave Government Solutions, and Ed Williams, Vice President of SpiderLabs EMEA. We're predicting 2024 to be quite an interesting year, with artificial intelligence being more widely adopted, an upcoming U.S. presidential election, and ongoing global wars. Threat actors have a lot to work with. We will be breaking down what cyber activity we can expect around the upcoming election, such as misinformation and nation-state ventures. Additionally, we'll look at the anticipated surge of DDoS attacks, malware attacks, the availability of ransomware as a service, the uncharted waters of the 2024 U.S. election, that thanks to the influence of AI, deepfakes, and disinformation campaigns, have the potential to result in attacks on electoral systems, voter databases, and election infrastructure. Also, the continuation of the cybersecurity talent shortage is becoming increasingly critical as technology and threat actors are evolving at a rapid pace. But before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Our webinar platform allows you to customize your viewer screen. You're able to expand the slideshow window and view all the different widgets below, such as the Q&A panel and the resource list. Feel free to adjust the size and position of the different windows to your liking. After Bill and Ed are finished with their discussion, we will have a question and answer period. If you have any questions, please don't be shy and place them in the area provided on your screen. Any questions not answered during the webinar will be answered via email afterward. And if you have any trouble with the webinar platform itself, the best suggestion is to log out and log back in again, and that should fix the problem. And lastly, today's presentation will be recorded, and we will be sending a follow-up email to all attendees with the link to that recording. So with all of that covered, let's dive right in. First, Bill and Ed, thanks so much for coming today. We appreciate it.
No problem.
Wonderful. Let's start out with this question here. As we noted earlier, AI will be the 800-pound gorilla in the room during the coming year. What are 2 or 3 points regarding AI that will make an impact in the upcoming year? Maybe, Ed, we could start with you first on that one.
Yeah, sure. Hi, really nice to be here. So we've definitely seen AI, everywhere since ChatGPT was released in November 2022, I think it was. It's now becoming increasingly obvious that there's an increased accessibility. So the barrier to entry has been reduced significantly since AI. So what does that actually mean for us in terms of offensive and defense? The bad guys now are able to craft what look like really good phishing emails, what look like really good types of attacks. So it's only going to get more and more pernicious, I think, as AI gets better and deeper. And with the reduced barriers to entry, with cloud computing and all those other things, we're only going to see more and more of it. One thing I'd like to say is it's really important for defenders to concentrate on the basics. That hasn't changed and that will not change. So making sure you've got good asset management in this crazy world where you're able to spin up machines left, right, and center. Vulnerability scanning is still important. I can see a time where patches will get released on a Tuesday, for example, and the malicious threat actors of varying different skill sets will have vulnerabilities and working exploits on Wednesday morning, ready to rock and roll. Instead of it being a normal nation state type scenario, I think with this reduced barrier to entry, the patch cycle is going to get a lot less. So we've really got to consider that. So making sure that your patches are done in a timely manner, making sure that you know your assets, all of that we know. None of that is a surprise to us. But I think with the acceleration of AI, there's just an acceleration of attacks and the way they're going to come towards us. So we've got to be very careful and make sure we know what we're doing.
Bill, any additional thoughts?
Sure. Ed did a great job there kind of covering the adversarial side of that. From the Trustwave government standpoint, we're certainly following all of the activity around the federal government. You can't be in a single conference or read anything around the federal government today where AI is not a massive topic. We do have our first executive order just a little over 3 months ago in October, signed by President Biden. One of the things that struck a lot of people, the very first sentence of that talked about the promise and yet the peril of artificial intelligence. So obviously, people are definitely looking at both sides of this. From a regulation standpoint, it's still not a lot of regulation. There's a lot of discussion around regulation. To date, only 12 states have actually implemented specific regulation around AI. I would expect that to probably more than double in a short time frame, certainly within the next 12 to 18 months. But the White House continues to push the conversation. Just yesterday, actually, they had the council meeting for AI at the White House. A lot of things came through that discussion, certainly talked about the rules and standards and adopting better controls and safeguards. But what was interesting from the highlights of that is that hiring the right individuals and the manpower shortage seemed to be the glaring thing that came out of that. One of the things that they did publish that I would recommend everyone look at is they actually put out a fact sheet from that council meeting that kind of highlights the things that went through and came out of that meeting, really around new funding, certain task forces being stood up at specific agencies, HHS specifically. They're going to have an Educate AI initiative where there will be additional funding for K through 12, obviously starting in that STEM area and making sure that children understand both the benefits and the risks of AI. I thought that was interesting. And then obviously around that manpower, there's an AI surge, talent surge initiative where they're going to look to obviously fill some of those gaps that they have in the shortage. I mean, the cybersecurity workforce shortage on itself is at an unprecedented level, but the AI, it's not so much the government's roadblocks to hiring people, it's just the fact that hiring the right people right now in AI with those skill sets, and obviously the government competing with industry and the AI surges that they have there. I think one of the things that was interesting when I was pivoting off some of the news from the White House was some of the stats just around the employment numbers. Probably the most alarming one that I saw, Doug, was the prediction of 85 million jobs to be replaced in the next 5 to 10 years from an AI perspective. Which, if you look at the risks of AI, obviously that automation is a benefit. But in the same sentence, in the same article, it said that in that same timeline, up to 97 million jobs would be created because of AI. So the fact that it's a big bad wolf and will replace humans is certainly not the case from what I've been able to see.
All right. Since we're on the topic, maybe we can double click down just a little bit. Let's start. Ed, how do you think organizations should approach defending themselves against AI-generated attacks? You'd mentioned, basic hygiene is always necessary, but do you think there's something more on the human side? Is it just training everyday workers to be aware of what's possible, or is there a technical way to defend against them?
So that and all the above. So what we know, ransomware, ransomware 2022-23 is hot topic. That hasn't gone away. That isn't going away. If we think about sort of deep dive into ransomware, how does malicious code get into an organization? It's normally through an email or some sort of vulnerability. So threat actors can leverage AI to create more compelling emails, more compelling phishing emails, then they're going to do that. And that's what they're doing. We're seeing that now. I think gone are the days where we'd see a badly written email where the grammar was really poor and the sentences didn't make any sense. That's long gone now. They're going to be far more targeted to individuals. That traditionally would have taken a lot of manpower and a lot of horsepower to do, but I think those days are slowly going. You can specifically with the use of the cloud create a ransomware as a service type attack or a service, and then pivot off that then to make sure you're getting into that organization and doing what you need to do. So that is going to be really bad, and we're seeing that already. But there's obviously a flip side to these things. So exactly as Bill mentioned, as bad as AI is, it's going to be a good thing as well. It's going to make us all more productive. So if we think about what we're doing within my team, within the pen test team, SpiderLabs, we're already using AI in a way to better create passwords and password-based attacks, and we're seeing lots of success with that. So imagine we're targeting a specific organization. We've got a large language model that we can fit into certain data that will give us what we think is a reasonable list of passwords. And to be honest, they're pretty good, and we get a lot of success out of that. So if we think about one step further, how can defenders use AI? Well, we know there's huge amounts of data flowing through organizations, specifically with SIEMs and MSS and things of that nature. So I think the more data, the better the learning, and it's going to continue to learn. So I think it's a double-edged sword in some ways. We as practitioners need to keep on top of it. Again, Bill mentioned the shortage, and I think we come on to that later. It's really important that practitioners keep on top of these things. You know, AI is not a fad. I think we can all appreciate that now. There were certain corners of my industry where, oh, it's a fad, it'll pass. Similar with cloud computing all those years ago, oh, it's just a box on the internet. You know, I think we've dispelled those myths now. We can move forward and use these tools to better defend ourselves, which is ultimately what we're after.
Bill, is there anything from the public sector side that differs from what Ed said, or is it more of the same?
I think it's a lot of the same. It comes down to, Doug, a question of how we defend against some of those things, right? So, I mean, when I think about AI, and I've talked to government executives at some of the recent events, especially the government portion of the Consumer Electronics Show out at Edge this year, AI is a topic where they're certainly looking to be able to figure out how they harness the benefits of it, but they're deeply concerned about the human factor of when these things are written by AI, right, from the ransomware scenarios that Ed mentioned, but specifically the phishing things. They can be a lot more targeted. You can feed some very specific government agency, government program, government people's information into this and get a script that is better than anything we've ever seen, right? Without spelling errors, without grammatical errors. And it prompts individuals to just make that human error, I think, that much more significant. So they're certainly concerned about that. So they're looking to see how they can leverage some of the AI things internally to be able to help defend against that, right? And even as much as feeding it back into AI engine saying, hey, was this authored by an AI engine, right? And that's not always 100% accurate, but it's funny that even at the education level, teachers are dumping essays from students into an AI engine saying, did you write this? And sometimes it'll come back and say, yes, that's something I've authored. So I see the government trying to leverage some of those same tactics to be able to see what's authentic and what's not. And I know we talk a little bit about the authenticity coming up here a little bit, but it's definitely a concern on what's real and what's not real that people are really just trying to understand.
Oh, right. All right, let's hop on to the next topic. Now, believe it or not, you can never tell from the media at all, but the U.S. will hold a presidential election in 2024. And there were some well-founded concerns that either AI or deepfakes or some other version of AI is going to play a role in this in some fashion. Bill, how concerned are you that the election, and not really just the U.S. election, but globally in the future, will be impacted by AI and these deepfakes?
Severely concerned, Doug. I mean, if you go to even the 2020 election, the cyber adversarial impacts and the things that were put out from a misinformation, whether that be a nation state or just party-driven things in social media, it influenced a lot of people. And sometimes the data was accurate, and many times it wasn't. I think that the increase in the believability of some of the deep fakes and its ability to disrupt some of these upcoming elections is highly concerning. I've seen several examples by some of our researchers, and it looks and sounds and appears that these are the words coming out of a very prominent person that's going to run for an election. Just the week before last in the New Hampshire primary, you had the potentially AI-generated, most likely AI-generated robocalls from President Biden telling people to stay away from the polls, right? And so, again, that was determined really quickly that it wasn't real, but that literally could have impacted people's decision, right, based on that being concerned that there was an actual threat or that they shouldn't actually go out and vote based on the polls or where things stood. So that's going to be an ongoing problem. AI's ability to take in mass amounts of data with the fact that we've had hundreds of millions of voter records that have been found on the dark web in the past. There's some SpiderLabs research in around that. AI is really good at analyzing really large volumes of data. And one of the things that they're going to be able to do is glean, better targeted campaign messages to better areas. They'll look at swing states. What is the voter sentiment and around that, and it gives them the ability to actually write campaign messages a lot more clear in that regard. So that misinformation is just going to be a tough thing on the American public in the upcoming election, as well as elections globally. I think that we have a long way to go for general media and the social medias to be able to vet and determine what's real and what's not real, and how do we police that and do our best to get rid of things that we know are not real, that are put online. Because the one thing the American public does is spread that information really quickly, right? They like it, they share it, they send it out to their friends, and all of a sudden you have a very damaging message that's put out there that was not authentic from the very beginning. So I think we're going to see some things in this election that are just going to shock people. And with the amount of data that's available, there'll be some very, very impressive things that are created. I'm just hoping that from a nation state standpoint, we're able to at least police that at some level as we get closer to making, obviously a very critical presidential election coming up in 2024.
Ed, perhaps you can give us a little insight from the EMEA perspective on their concerns, the concerns in Europe and other parts of the world concerning AI. Are they different in any way than what Bill just said, or does it reflect a common concern?
No, it's a common concern, and it is a concern that is shared by almost everybody, I would say. The ability for a resourced threat actor to create a deepfake video within a pretty short time frame has gone up exponentially, I would say, in the last 12 to 18 months. You add that into social media and the way you can propagate information around, it's very worrying and concerning. And these are big ticket items that we've all got to worry ourselves about. You can also consider, with all this data, that videos now are going to get targeted. People of a certain race, a certain orientation, a certain location. And be very specific. If you think about the phishing example and just magnify that onto an election, it's exactly the same thing. It's with all this data, it's so much more targeted. So it is a concern. But as everything, being the optimist, I would like to think that as we move forward, there'll be sort of systems and processes and procedures that'll be able to counteract that. How quickly they'll come on board is anybody's guess at the moment, but they will happen. They'll have to be put through certain tests and scenarios, but it'll happen. So short term, it's a concern. More medium to long term, it's still a concern, but slightly less, I would say. So the old adage of is it yellow and quacks is probably gone in the short term, because everything looks like a duck, I would say, until it doesn't. So it's certainly a very, very interesting time that we've got in front of us.
I appreciate the ending on a positive note. That's always very, very good for everybody. Now, maybe moving away from AI for a second and looking at more traditional type of attacks.
Sure.
What other type of cyber attacks might be in store for the election process? We had earlier mentioned maybe DDoS playing a role, or just general any type of malware. It could be ransomware. Do you expect those type of attacks to pop up this year, or not? Bill?
Yes and yes.
Or Ed? Yeah. Who wants to go first?
Sorry, Bill. It was just I have to say.
You're absolutely right. I'll just add a quick tidbit and then and let you take the wheel. I mentioned the September 2020 voter registration list that was for sale on the dark web. There was an article, again, posted in early December, just around voting experts warning for the serious threats of the software systems that actually run on the voting equipment. And it being vulnerable to breaches, and obviously being issues in the past. And it's obviously a very controversial topic, but those two specific systems from a software perspective represent just around 70% of all the votes polled in the United States. So when you think about that volume and that risk just from software, we've got to make sure that we continue to follow the DevSecOps processes. And obviously there's a lot of discussion in the federal government around the SBOMs and ensuring that the code is reviewed and is free from vulnerabilities. There's a risk there, right? Whenever you have a computer and a technology, people with the right amount of resources and the right amount of time just have the ability to compromise systems. It's something that is a fact that we've had for a long time, and with a lot of the AI support of that, and just the ability to look at vulnerabilities in software that exist across all platforms. I mean, that's why things are patched on a weekly basis, and you have these different things are put out by CISA, right, around vulnerable code and what the process for the federal government is to patch those or to get those off of a network in a timely manner. I think that some of those systems are going to come under a lot of scrutiny between now and then. And obviously that automation and that privilege that it's brought as far as the speed of being able to calculate elections is super important, but it represents a massive risk. If we saw those type of things 4 years ago, at the speed of advancement in people's ability to compromise software, I think we're going to see even more of that concern discussed, and probably have some pretty stringent requirements and regulation around those systems between now and probably 60, 90 days before the election, just to ensure that the credibility of what we're about to conduct as a nation is not compromised.
Okay. Ed, your turn.
Bill, I thought it was excellent. That was brilliant. Certainly from my perspective, SDLC, obviously for voting systems, we know that voting infrastructure is going to be a target. Geopolitically, there's a lot going on. So that's going to certainly enhance interest in certain areas and in certain situations. So that needs to be considered. 4 years ago, cloud was obviously a big thing. It's an even bigger thing now. You add on AI to that, the ability to conduct DDoS attacks for infrastructure, be it national level infrastructure, even local infrastructure, is going to be enhanced. So there needs to be provisions to make sure those types of things don't happen. There's backups. Again, ransomware is still, even though it's not as popular as AI in the mainstream media, it's still happening all the time. I see it with my clients and with new clients. They still get breached. It's worth remembering the things that can be done: segregation, good patching, which we spoke about earlier. Malware attacks, phishing, emails. Email is still the #1 method for organizations to get compromised. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. So you add in everything that we've spoken about, it's still really, really important to make sure that you can get on top of those things. And then we've already spoken about sort of disinformation campaigns. And I'd add into that targeted disinformation campaigns. These are really important. People are getting slightly more savvy, but as they're getting more savvy, the attacks are getting more targeted, so it sort of equals itself out over time. And I'd like to think that at a certain point in time we will get there, but there's no sign of that slowing at the moment.
All right. Well, let's turn away from the elections for a moment and just look back a little bit. We had mentioned earlier about the cybersecurity talent shortage and AI's role in perhaps helping that or maybe hindering it. But Ed, you had talked about that a little bit earlier. Any thoughts on how organizations can help fill their talent gap using AI?
Yes. So the gap is real, because I see it every day myself. We're looking for good, talented pen testers and sort of technology-related people. So it's very difficult, and good ones get snapped up straight away. It's also difficult to keep good people. But there is very much a cyber shortage. What we've seen is recently is the ability to use AI to make people more productive in the way people are writing code, the way people are pen testing. There's not shortcuts, but there's certainly things that we can do to make sure that they're more productive, and still making sure that we give clients the level of technical expertise and coverage that they require. I can't see it changing, so I'm going to flip negative now just for a second, but I'll try and end on positive if I remember. I can't see that changing anytime soon. There is such a gap, and technology moves so quickly. To fill that gap is really, really difficult. When I look internally, we're hiring people now. Some of our best pen testers, for example, come from a non-traditional IT background. They're people who've got music degrees, political science degrees, and fantastic pen testers. But there's that small gap that needs to be filled to get them up to speed, and that can be filled with AI and shadowing and mentorship and things like that. So it's very difficult. It's a global problem. We utilize a global team, so we're trying to fill that gap by using resources globally, and they're excellent, but there's just not enough people coming through the funnel, and we're doing our best to make sure we can help there where we can.
Maybe you kind of just touched on this a little bit, and it's interesting. Trustwave's CISO, Corey Daniels, was speaking to me the other day, and he mentioned that he thought AI would be helpful in turning like lower tier analysts and researchers and giving them the ability to act on a higher level. What do you think of that? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, that's absolutely a possibility. Where I see us adding significant value is finding really, really difficult issues and vulnerabilities. AI isn't there at the moment. That's not to say it won't be there in 12, 24 months. So there's a certain mindset that good pen testers have that is difficult to replicate, because we're doing things that the machine shouldn't be able to do. So it's having that slightly different mindset. Now we can analyze code and the heuristics that we can put around that. But there are AI models that we use internally that help shortcut some of that. But ultimately, we're still not quite there. We can just point things to a machine and say, yep, that's secure, everyone go home to your medals. That's not the case. It's still finding those really difficult corner edge scenarios is where we add significant value to our clients.
Now, Bill, in the public sector, I mean, we all know the federal government has more rules and regulations on what you can and can't do. But is there a role for AI to help the federal government or state or even local governments fill some of this talent gap?
I think there has to be, Doug. When you look at different analyst predictions out there, and obviously we've seen the numbers, they range anywhere from 3.5 million to 5.5 million cyber professionals with the gap. Some people say the gap has reached 4 million. So not all the numbers necessarily add up, but Gartner's data point is that 50% of all significant cybersecurity incidents by the year 2025 will come from the skills gap and the lack of people to be able to address the volume of attacks. When people actually see the disclosed numbers of the volume and the number of single attempts to infiltrate government networks on a daily basis, it's staggering. There was very specific data shared this year at CES, and just what Customs and Border Protection and TSA alone see on a daily basis. And the numbers, I mean, they seem to be 50 to 100x what they were just a few years ago. So the volume and the onslaught of what these folks are under from an adversarial standpoint or cyber compromise standpoint is again unprecedented. I think to many of Ed's points, using AI in that beneficial manner, to be able to prioritize things, to be able to look at significant amounts of data. When you think about the volume of their attacks and being able to use AI to say, hey, make sense of this for me. These are the different attack signatures that I've seen over the last 48 hours. Prioritize these for me based on what you know of my environment. So some of those aspects I think are going to be extremely beneficial. But again, there's a lot of still errors that come out of that information, right? You think about the AI hallucinations, right? Not everything's going to be put back out as an accurate data point. So it can certainly assist, but it's not going to replace. So they still got to remain diligent. Some of the A, B's, and C's of cybersecurity still have to be renewed in a lot of the federal government. We call it blocking and tackling. I mean, you think about the risk that still exists just on the legacy systems that are still at play. When we do a lot of our work, and Ed mentioned some of the pen testing, we'll find systems that are still online, still connected to very critical government applications that are on legacy databases, that are on legacy systems, some releases that are 10, 12, 15 years old because of the way the applications were written. So you can imagine when a skilled pen tester goes in and does a credentialed or uncredentialed test of those environments, the results are pretty damaging and full database compromise within a few hours. So these are the kind of things I think we just got to continue to be very thoughtful of. And with AI and the other things, just make sure that we're going to some of those basics, continue to test the environments, continue to try to build with security, built in versus bolted on. and then keep preparing, right? We don't do a good job in industry or government of preparing for when that cyber attack will happen. Not if it'll happen, will it happen. So those tabletop exercises, those abilities to come in and do assessments on your environment to understand areas that you should focus on the most, we could use a renewed effort in some of those. And there's obviously some barriers to doing that on all systems and all networks, but we've got to be able to highlight some of the priorities of that and make sure that we're defending the most critical assets. And the HVAs and some of the other initiatives by an operational directors are trying to shine a light on that, but the government needs a lot more funding help to be able to go and address some of those risks. All
right. I think the next question follows up a bit on this, on what you were just saying. In the predictions that we posted from you earlier this year, you were very upbeat that the federal government would do more to keep pace with technological change in the coming year. You mentioned several, not bills, but similar to the executive order. Can you just run through some of those examples of what you stated earlier and how you believe they're going to help in the coming year?
Sure. I think there's, when you look at the challenges that are facing the federal government right now, I am excited about some of the things I've seen on the investments in next generation SOC capabilities. CISA has done a phenomenal job on providing guidance. If you talk to people on the Hill, they focus some of the risk on small businesses. So there's been a ton of effort put around shields up and cyber hygiene and some of the things that they can do in and around that. But I think some of the investments that the government's making really around things like quantum was one of the things on my predictions list, is going to be extremely important. Quantum presents some phenomenal opportunities in our ability to reach scale that, 1 million, or some analysts predict, 100 million computers, complex problems that even they could never solve, that a quantum computer could solve in just minutes. That presents huge opportunity in innovation and our ability to do some things extremely better in the federal government, but it also presents a lot of risk, right? Adversarial use of quantum and some of those things, and the race for quantum, obviously from nation states, there's some that say they're going to be there before the U.S. So U.S. Department of Energy and a couple others have obviously made massive investments in quantum and huge headway. You look at the work in the major companies in the U.S. that IBM and Google have accomplished in quantum. We're doing okay. We're probably not as far along as we would like to be. Our predictions of what quantum will be able to do in the next 5 years align with that of other nation states. That could be a threat to us, especially when you think about things of encryption and the computing power that if we're already vulnerable in some areas, when you think about the likes of what quantum can do from brute force and other things like that, it's a concern. But I think the U.S. is doing a great job on that innovative side. You couple in AI with the potential of quantum merging at some point, that's something that most people won't even speak to, what the potential of that is. Probably too powerful for most of them to understand, but they certainly expect all that to be extremely possible within a decade. And that's a really short window of time for a significant amount of change.
All right. Before I ask Ed for his thoughts on this from his side of the world, I just want to remind everyone, it's a great time. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A box and we'll get to it shortly. And with that, Ed, are you seeing anything different as far as what governments are going to try to do in the coming year?
No, certainly from the other side of the world, it's still, the focus is still on the basics. We spoke about them earlier. Patching, passwords, good policy, segmentation is really important, I think. We've spoken at length really that, we know ransomware is still very much front and center. If you can stop that initial compromise happening or reduce the impact of that initial compromise, you're going to be in a pretty good state. So you're not going to get run through and things are not going to be as bad as they may initially seem. So having good defense in depth, that hasn't changed. I've been doing this for a long time. A lot of the mantras that we use, defense in depth being one of the main ones, seems to be a little bit not as popular as it used to be. So I'd like to get that back up and running if we could. I think the cloud and AI have taken over, but certainly having good hygiene is no different. to private and public sector, and I'd like to see that continue.
Excellent. All right. With that, let's move on to our Q&A portion. We have several in already. The first one, I'll try to read this properly. It's a little tough to read. Do you see AI technology itself as being vulnerable, or is that a specific concern? I believe what the questioner is asking is, are they open to attack in some way for account stealing, or do they perhaps have bad coding practices that could be exploited?
Yeah, I can take this one. So we see now that AI implementations are weak and open to abuse. What we're typically seeing is a couple of things. So the models are too broad. So say you've got a model, or you just want to be a chatbot, and you just loaded in the internet, for example. That's not true. That's a trivial example. So the model itself is too broad, and that can be abused, and there's certain reputational damage with that. But we're also seeing then lots of weaknesses around infrastructure of AI, which allows us then to compromise the data sets and then sort of pollute the data sets and get out things that that shouldn't be in those data sets. So we're seeing those, and we're doing those on pretty much on a day-to-day basis. We as a practice see lots of opportunities and get lots of opportunities to pen test and to check on issues, security-related issues around AI and large language models. So yes, they're very much vulnerable, like anything. If they're not properly implemented, if security isn't baked in right at the beginning, it's always hard to revert, to put security back in, and inevitably it costs a lot more to do that. Once you get a report from us that says you need to do X, Y, and Z, it's going to cost a lot more, rather than having brought us in right at the beginning and we can advise on best practice.
Okay. Anything to add to that, Bill?
I guess, the question, could a technology system be vulnerable, right? I just kind of chuckle because I don't know that we've ever had a threat hunt or a pen test where we haven't found something that could have been damaging to the organization, whether it be basic configuration errors all the way up to ports that are open to the internet that you weren't aware of. So the thing with AI is it's so new. It literally changes on the hour. Things that you can ask AI that would produce not 100% accurate data might give you completely different results hours or minutes later. It's very fluid. Anything that's that fluid from a technology standpoint is going to continue to have risks. It's just ensuring that those things that we're fixing very fast, ensure that we continue to try to ensure that the systems get better and smarter. And so far, we've done a good job of that. But there's still AI poisoning. There's still AI systems that are not governed by the entities that you would want them to be governed by, that could be used more maliciously. So I think from a vulnerability standpoint, we probably haven't seen any of the major issues from a vulnerability standpoint that will come from the AI systems, but they certainly exist. But I'm seeing good policing so far around making sure that some of those systems don't. And you look at the major three that people talk about, there's others that are still active inside of those organizations and corporations where they're just not comfortable yet on the power. They feel that they're going to be more capable systems, but they haven't gotten the safeguards and the controls around them yet. That's why the general public doesn't have access. So seeing that type of responsibility gives me encouragement for it.
Oh, okay. This is probably perhaps a quick answer, but who do you see as the biggest / strongest threat actors in the coming year? Nation state or not? No?
I'll be quick on that. It's nation state. It's pull up any online video or article on the AI race or the quantum race, and you'll get a front row seat to nation states that we're concerned about, and the investments and the amount of sheer data some of those countries have, where the populations are significantly more than the U.S., and the data privacy and the data that they collect from their citizens isn't controlled. It's controlled by the government, and the people really have no say in it. So with AI and some of this next generation quantum, data is power. When you have that many more people and that much more data, it certainly gives you an advantage. So nation states, without a doubt, in my opinion.
Ed, anything different?
No, I'd agree with that. The only thing I would say is probably a broadening of nation state threat actors. There's the obvious ones, but I think there's probably a few more you can throw into the pot as well, which would be of interest.
Excellent. All right. What are your greatest non-AI related concerns for 2024? Ed, you were just talking.
Yeah, I'll go first. I've probably alluded this to a few times, but I'll do it again.
Yeah.
Ransomware hasn't gone anywhere. If anything, it's probably picked up in pace. It's just not the new. It's really important to make sure that we're focusing on what I call the basics, or not the easy things. They're called the basics because they're not easy. They're the basics because they need to be done. Making sure that you understand how ransomware works, how it gets into an organization, how it propagates around, typically a Microsoft infrastructure. Being able to stop that then at certain choke points is really useful and reduces impact. We do a lot of work with clients once they get to a certain level of maturity in terms of patching passwords and policy, being able to stop ransomware moving across an organization. And they get a lot of success through that, typically through a purple team exercise, but that sort of reaps significant benefits, and we can mimic and monitor that to make sure that we're hitting all the right things. But certainly a continued focus on ransomware and the understanding of ransomware, I think, needs to be increased as well. It just seems to be this big term, but it actually is, there's an entry point, a way it gets moved around, and things, action and objectives after that. So a real understanding of that is really important.
Wonderful. Bill?
Yeah, Doug, I think it's the chicken and the egg problem on the federal government side, right? We have no shortage of great ideas and very well thought out executive orders and binding operational directives, but we still have this huge landscape of legacy systems, and the government hasn't even approved the budget yet this year, right? So we were under a continuing resolution through January. They got extended again through March, right? And so even if it is the budget is passed in March, which many are predicting that could be a full year continuing resolution because of the election year, it's extremely difficult to go impact change and innovate when you're not funded properly. So we've got to get that figured out, and there's got to be a focus on getting those legacy systems brought forward into next generation cloud systems, or at least put into a new capability where it doesn't have the vulnerability based on the platform supports that it has. So for me, it would be the legacy systems that still exist and the lack of funding for the government to be able to solve these problems in an efficient manner.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question. And Bill, I think you basically answered most of it with your previous answer there. But maybe for Ed, what would be the one area you would recommend organizations shore up from a security standpoint? You'd mentioned hygiene and a couple of others. Is there anything else that pops to mind to help wrap this up?
Yeah, one thing I like to see, and it's actually quite difficult to do, is good and proper segmentation and segregation of data. I've seen it done really poorly in organizations. I've also seen it done really well. It requires a real understanding of how data flows through an organization, and nobody knows that better than the pen tester, to be honest. But it's worth doing, because as soon as something bad happens, the impact of that is reduced, by a factor. So I would definitely recommend that organizations consider good and proper segregation segmentation. It can be done in the cloud or on-prem or both. Consult your local pen test organization to make sure you're doing it properly. But there's certain benefits, or there's massive benefits, shall I say, in terms of that reduction of impact, because it's so important. As Bill mentioned, it's not if you're going to get attacked, it's when you're going to get attacked. So being ready, reducing that impact, and you can get back to business as quick as you can. So have a look into that and make sure you're doing that. But it needs to be done thoughtfully. Don't rush into it.
Bill, any thoughts to wrap it up?
Sure. I would add to that the government and enterprise, they make a tremendous effort to be secure, right? But I would just recommend getting a fresh perspective at times. to understand where you stand, right? Many folks will leverage the same cybersecurity partners for a lengthy period of time, and don't be afraid to get a fresh set of eyes. General cybersecurity maturity assessments, the adoption of cloud. Many folks still haven't done a cloud security assessment in their environment. With the next generation security operations centers, have you had that assessed? Have you had experts come in and actually look at the policies and procedures and how you defend your network? Is there better ideas? Are there better ways to do that? And then obviously Ed talked about pen testing. I can't stress that enough. And then really the inevitable, right? We talked about not the if, but the when. Make sure you're ready. Most organizations still don't do exercises internally from a tabletop cybersecurity incident exercise. It's so critically important to have those type of processes in place so that you truly know what do you do first, who are you going to engage, what's the process, do you engage law enforcement or the federal government? You really don't know the answer to those questions until you put yourself in those real life situations. So can't encourage those exercises enough. So I think a fresh perspective and being able to look at those through new providers, new fresh of eyes, a new tester, right? They may have different procedures and approaches to things to let you know other areas of risk that you should focus on in your environment.
All right. Well, with that, I think we are about out of time for today, and we have to wrap this up. I want to thank Bill and Ed for their time, and especially to thank all of you for taking the time to attend this event. I understand everyone's busy. We really do appreciate it here at Trustwave. So everyone, have a great day, and we hope to see you again at another Trustwave webinar in the future.
Thanks, Doug.